Welcome all to today's webinar hosted by NASPA's Committee on Local Government Management Education on behalf of Kelvin Johnson and Kim Nelson, who are going to co-moderate today's panel. I welcome you, and we're excited to have you involved in this important discussion. This webinar is organized to help NASPA members and educators in the field of local government management become more familiar with examples and leading practices to enhance public engagement and trust in local government. We welcome local government professionals from Akron, Durham, Macon, and Newark to share insights on how their communities are taking more steps to engage the public and communicate with the public in an era of tension around public trust. This topic came about through discussion from the Local Government Management Education Committee, because we know across the country, local governments are facing the challenge of constructively engaging the public and fostering trust in an era of increased cynicism. The guests for our panel today include Kimberly Beckett, Carmen Ortiz, Chris Flohr, and Agban Edemwani. Sorry, Agban. I will do brief introductions, and then we'll turn to our first question. Kimberly Beckett is President and CEO for the Downtown Akron Partnership, where she works closely with downtown stakeholders, local government leaders, and property owners and residents to advance the downtown neighborhood. She holds a master's in public administration degree from the University of Akron. Carmen Ortiz is Budget Engagement Manager for the Community Partnerships and Engagement Department for the City of Durham, North Carolina, and holds a master's degree in International and Global Studies from Northeastern University. Chris Flohr, who's not yet with us online, is Chief Communications Officer for Macon-Bibb County, Georgia, and he holds a Master's of Art in Journalism, Mass Communications, and Public Relations from Kent State University. And Agban Edemwani is Head of Data and Digital Innovation in the Office of Information Technology for the City of Newark, New Jersey, where he's engaged with the city's 311 system, among other important initiatives. He holds a degree from Wesleyan University in environmental biology and mathematics, and he's recently published in Public Administration Review an article that you might want to reference, Frontline Workers in Civic Tech, online in December 2025, with great insight into the role of civic tech in public engagement and the topic that we're addressing today. So thank you, panelists, for taking time to join us, and thank you, audience, for participating in the webinar as well. If we can begin with Kimberly and then move to Carmen and then Agban, I'd like to ask if you can share some details about the programs that you currently manage and how your work enhances and contributes to the fostering public trust within your community. Kimberly, we'll turn to Akron and start with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and having the ability to share insights and to learn too from other cities and what people are working on. So the Downtown Akron Partnership, we're a nonprofit. We manage our downtown special improvement district. Some cities call them business improvement districts. Our states have called them different things, but we work closely with property owners, business owners, local government, philanthropy to advance the downtown neighborhood. And that means many different things: clean and safe programming. We have an ambassador program. We do beautification, creative placemaking, that kind of sense of creating that sense of place in the downtown district, marketing and communications for the neighborhood, economic development, filling storefronts, working with the city and the county to attract tenants to downtown. And we have a growing residential population, so engaging our residents downtown. But really core at our work, our mission is to build a vibrant and valuable downtown, is connecting with people and building relationships. We can't do anything that we do to enhance the neighborhood without working with our partners and building trust and relationships to get things done, to hear what people need and to help respond to those needs and make progress. Referencing to this idea about community engagement, we are also a member of the Akron Civic Commons team. So Akron Civic Commons is part of the Reimagining the Civic Commons national effort to really, look at how, managing public assets, managing the public realm, how well-designed, well-programmed, and well-maintained public spaces really enhance community connection, economic development, and trust building. So how do we use these common spaces to really build trust and connection? We host a number of cultural events, and programming in public space. Everything we do is in public space so that people can see that they can come together. That whole like interaction with like getting to know someone that's, different than you or that you haven't met before. That's really where we focus on our work in terms of building community.
All right, good afternoon, all. Excited to be here to share out some of the incredible work that is happening across the country in public trust and community engagement. So a little bit about what I do, and so I oversee our community engagement initiatives within the City of Durham's Community Partnerships Department. So I specifically oversee our Youth Services Division, our Community Engagement Division. We have a Process Learning Division and our Participatory Budgeting Division. Through our participatory budgeting program, which we would be launching our 5th cycle in January, we've allocated about $2.4 million per cycle. And in our most recent cycle, we've engaged over 16,000 residents in the decision-making of funding projects within the community. And so through funding different projects and engaging residents through the PB process, our major goal is to rebuild trust in communities that have been historically marginalized or have been underinvested in the community, including our youth and a justice involved individual. Specifically, one of the most impactful things that we've done through PB in our last cycle, we led an entire proposal development cycle at our jail, at the Durham County Jail. And so since our inception in 2018, we have engaged incarcerated individuals and the idea collection and voting process of PB. However, during cycle 4, we really wanted to expand the relationship. Since again, we really want to embed equity in all of the work that we did. And so we launched a 12-week process where the incarcerated individuals, we had a small cohort of about 12 individuals that we met for 12 weeks that walked through the entire vetting process. And so this is something that we do with our residents during the proposal development, where residents get to look at all the project ideas that were submitted, vet them for feasibility. It's one of the first things that they look at is something that we can build. Then they go look at impact and of course equity. We want to make sure that the projects that are being funded are high impactful in the community. And so we led this 12-week process at the jail, and we engaged over 133 individuals at the jail. They also were able to participate in a Durham civics training. So as we came to the jail, we didn't just want to have them, vet projects, but we also wanted this to be a meaningful and transformative opportunity for them. And so we led them through all of the trainings that our residents go through. They went through Neighborhood Compass, which is a mapping tool that our budget delegates use to determine where projects would go. They also went through Durham history. We wanted them to learn Durham, the history of Durham, how it's been shaped by the communities. And so that's been very important to us. And so to us is as we are sort of building this work in this engagement department through PB and the different divisions, we want to make sure that we're intentional in everything that we do, that we are transparent and consistent. And that's why I think Durham has been so impactful in the work that we do. The consistency and transparency has been embedded into all of the work that we do.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Agman Adamwani from the City of Newark. I work in the City of Newark, heading our data operations and digital innovation. And, in the work that I do, I work across all the city departments, digitizing processes, often with a focus on constituent engagement and on civic life improvement throughout the years in order to build better trust with the public and meet, the mayor's goals of digitization and modernization. We have digitized our 4311 work, put it all online and allow citizens, better control over getting complaints to the city and getting resolutions and, seeing the effort that the city puts in improving their lives on a day-to-day basis. This is a platform that is, public, so everyone can be aware of the work that's going on around the city, and had been particularly impactful in helping us, resolve some of the issues that we had in the recent snowstorms that, occurred earlier this year. We've also recently done some work digitizing our homeless services process, cutting down the triage time of getting people off the streets from, hours and days to, less than an hour, which has been very impactful as we have a lot of homeless services offered in the city. And so we get a lot of out of town homeless. And, you know, we had been having an issue that the mayor and the homeless department, the health department had really been trying to focus on resolving. We've also done, digital hiring initiative work in the past to try to improve the current population that's already in Newark, in addition to all the economic improvement that has been going on. And, we try to foster better trust through greater transparency. We have open data initiatives. We have an open data platform. We've developed public dashboards, such as our housing tracker, which allows all the constituents to understand better about the housing stock that exists in Newark and the land bank work that has been going on to provide more lots for purchase and reclaiming abandoned properties and vacant properties around the city. In the future, we're also looking to form sort of voluntary citizen advisory councils so that when we are working on some of these projects, we can really get really focused attention and voluntary focused attention and vetting on some of the things that are going to happen, some of the things that we have on the pipeline that are going to happen, and really use that feedback to improve the processes before anything is even done, which we think is going to really help cut down on, complaints and maybe like constituent sort of disagreement. So, we've really been thinking through all our modernization processes and through our modernization efforts about how better to build trust, how better to improve processes, and how better to make sure that economic improvement is equitable across the city.
Thanks to our panelists. And Chris is having some difficulty getting online. Hopefully, he will be able to join us momentarily, and we'll return to him for an introduction. Until then, I think Calvin has our next.
Again, I'm sorry, I just missed that.
I just said I think Calvin has our next question.
All right, perfect. So question for you has really to do with, I have a lot of questions, and I first want to thank you all. This is really exciting. I'm taking down notes. I'm copiously taking down notes because we're trying to do something very similar with our students here at the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs. And so thank you all for sharing. The first question that I have is, as you think about your work, what skills are the most critical to success? And what do you hope educators emphasize in the classroom when preparing students for similar work? And that's being pitched to all three of you all, so don't all jump in at the same time.
I'll jump in and say communications and listening. So like being able to communicate with just so many different type of stakeholders, whether you're working with residents or elected officials, funders, to business owners, just understanding how to navigate those communications and how to meet people where they are and understand what's important to them, which really, I guess, starts with listening. So listening first, that kind of like what I think of like as a servant learning mentality of like here to meet you where you are, hear your concerns, and then try to find pathways to solve problems and make you feel heard. So I know that's not always the easiest thing to teach, but it is definitely like an emphasis that when I talk with my team and partners about, being able to, effectively share your mission, your goals, what's available, and then communicate outcomes is really important, and then communicate with individuals.
I can jump in. I would say that one of the things that's very important to the work that we do is listening, and when we listen, we don't always need to come up with answers, right? A lot of times you go into the community And residents don't necessarily expect answers from you, but they want to share, they want to vent, they want to express how they feel. And so being able to actively listen and being empathy is huge. So I would say active listening, transparent, I think is one of the things. Residents can tell very quickly, elected officials, leadership, when you're being transparent and when you're not being transparent. So I would say being able and genuine. One of the things that I speak to my team is just be genuine. It's okay to not always have the answers. It's okay to not ever have everything put together, because residents and community members will be able to see that very through when you're just here to sort of check the box and go through an agenda. So I would say listening, being genuine, and being transparent, I would say are some of those things that it's really hard to teach, but I would definitely emphasize, for students really looking into careers that would take them to, engage residents, be in the community, to really focus on these three things. And one of the things that I like to say, if this job is not for everyone, and it's really important to also emphasize that this is really hard work, because it can be very emotionally hard, right? And so the job is not for everyone, but if it's something that you really want to do, to just be very genuine and transparent.
I'll go next. Calvin, if you can just please repeat the second part of your question. You said skills most important to success, and then another part about
Yeah, just
the.
yeah, we struggle. Yeah, we're struggling. Well, I don't know about others, but we're struggling with trying to figure out what to emphasize in the classroom to actually prepare students, right? You all have mentioned things that you just can't teach. Sometimes you just have to have it. I guess you can train folk to at least adapt some of it. But what are the things that we should be doing in the classroom to actually prepare our students for similar work?
Sure. So, much as the other panelists have said today, um, this skills that are definitely important to success, communication, being able and willing to talk to people and to listen to them, empathy, I think is also huge, because, you know, when we go out and we interact with constituents, when you go out and interact with constituents, you are doing your job. They are living their lives, so it's really important to remember that. And so the things that we do can be very impactful in ways that we may not understand. So it's important to listen to them and, understand where they're coming from. Um, Acknowledgement of the truth. And that might sound odd, but you cannot go out to someone who, like, their garbage hasn't been picked up for 3 weeks and say, hey, yeah, our guys have been going out and picking up garbage every day. No, like that will immediately just break trust, because they'll say like, oh, you're feeding them a line, or, it's just, it really just, halts a lot of the work that you're trying to do. Collaboration, being able to bring people together to do, to just get to the solution. That is something that should definitely be emphasized in the classroom. Um, if you put together exercises that, help emphasize or help, show different aspects of collaboration or different types of collaboration, that will definitely be something I think would be very useful, because oftentimes maybe people have, especially if you've always been around people of similar socioeconomic status or similar, academic pursuit, you may not realize, some of the skills that you need, or some of the innate things that you have to be considerate of as you try to collaborate across, a vast range of people. And then advocacy, I think just advocating for the people that you are doing the work for, is also very important, because there will be municipal governments can often be very top down. The mayor sets the agenda, and then the directors go out and execute it through the people that work under them. So, that and same, works for state with the governor, and, federal with the president. So it's important to advocate upwards for, the things that are for what the constituents are seeing, but also for what, especially if you're in a position of power, what the frontline workers are also seeing. And that's the thing that, we talk about in, the paper that you had mentioned earlier, Eric, that, we did on the 431 work that we've done in the city of Newark, is that the frontline workers are a very vital tool to building trust in the community. So, empowering them with, the knowledge that their advocacy will be, listened to and will be taken further up the chain is really, really important.
Sorry, it's my turn now, and I was having some issues with unmuting. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My question is about technology. We're seeing technology being used in all types of government work today, and in communication specifically, and of course in public engagement. Can you share a little bit about how you are using technology in your efforts to engage your publics? And let's start with Agbanar. Agban, did I get it right? I'm
Just
sorry.
Agmon. Yeah, just
Agban.
Agmon's fine for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
I'll start. This is something that I'm steeped in every day. So ways in which we use technology, just almost everyone has a cell phone these days. We recognize that some people are not as technologically savvy as others, but for the most part, digitization efforts have proven to, really help a lot of the things that the city tries to do when it comes to improving, constituent living. Um, Digitizing our 4311, that really helped people better engage with trying to get attention to the issues that they saw around them. Online payments really helps people not have to take time out of their day, figure out parking at City Hall in order to get, something paid for that should be like as little as 3 buttons, or putting in your credit card information. Um, and, in the city of Newark in particular, maybe this may not be applicable everywhere, but we also set up public Wi-Fi and, public, fiber, which has really helped put a lot of people online and give them access to online services that they otherwise wouldn't have had access to. Now, that is a grand undertaking. So I know it may not necessarily be something that every municipality can do, but public, they can explore public-private partnerships, in order to achieve some form of providing just free access, free public access to utilities, essentially. And then now, obviously the big thing is AI. Everyone's talking about AI this, AI that. That's something that we have to approach with a great amount of care, because although it can make some things easier, like, okay, we provide an AI chatbot that indexes all the information within the city, so it allows people to quickly answer questions for themselves. Yes, but we also have to consider like what the impact that's going to have on, the employee population, and also on people's trust in the government. Because if we don't set these things up properly, if we don't consider sovereign AI systems, it will just easily break people's trust in us. I'm pretty sure everyone here has had to call in for a problem to some company and dealt with, like an AI system that has, felt like it was, not giving them the answers or the resolution that they were looking for, and they just wanted to speak to an agent. So just also understanding how to balance that too, and so those are kind of some of the things that I would say are worth keeping in mind, with respect to, approaching civic technology.
Great. Thank you. Carmen, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you. So, technology is critical to the work that we do. I can't imagine not having it. And so we use technology, we use engagement platforms, we do messaging campaigns, social media outreach, mapping tools. And so it definitely supports all of the work that we do. Some of the most popular project ideas that we're getting right now through PB are around technology, around including Wi-Fi in areas around the city that do not have public Wi-Fi, or even charging stations across the city, including our bus stations. And so technology is important, and so it's definitely something we use. However, I do want to note that technology should always support the work that we do, not replace human connection. It's just really important for me to add that, because some of the most effective outreach that we do is face-to-face. Specifically, as we embed equity, we need to understand that a lot of our underserved communities are those that traditionally we do not engage through digital channels. And so I do believe technology is important, but we also need to remember that for this work that we do is really important to also have that sort of face-to-face human component.
Great. And Kimberly?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just jump in and say I agree with everything Carmen said, in terms of like being able to expand your reach and share more information more effectively, reach new audiences. But there's also that challenge, especially if we think about like when we're trying to build connection, the epidemic of loneliness and like people having connection to each other. So making sure that whatever like technology-based resource we're reaching out, but then we also have this like other way for people to connect face to face, to experience things together in community, to help build those moments of trust and honestly shared moments of joy together, to help what really makes us feel like a community. So being like if I just think about like just technology in terms of just sharing information about events and programming and public meetings and like things that we want the community to be engaged with, and finding new ways to do that. Our ambassadors use the technology platform so we can track, similar to 311, like all the work that they're doing. So when a property owner says like, hey, what have the ambassadors been up to? We can have like all this data in terms of where they've been, what they've been, the types of solutions that they've been working on with our property owners and our local government. So there's all sorts of platforms, but just emphasizing the importance of having that personal connection.
Great. And I did want to acknowledge that Chris Floor, our fourth panelist, has joined us. And Chris, we are just talking about how technology is used to facilitate engagement with the public and building trust, but also some of our panelists has talked about some of the potential risks of technology or worries about becoming overly dependent on it and losing face-to-face connections. Would you like to weigh in on that question at all?
Absolutely. And I think the fact that I had technology issues this morning logging in is a perfect example of why there needs to be some kind of human behind any tech that's used. Technically, the email should have got my spam filters, but for some reason, my IT department doesn't use spam inboxes in Outlook. It keeps everything centralized, so we never see spam emails. So I think when we're dealing with technology, you've always got to think from a government perspective is who's the end result and who's being served. Technology is not the end all be all of any government service. It can be used to help out. We use a program here called it's a 311 style program called SeeClickFix. It's a way we do service request. We've used it for the better part of 15, 16 years from now. But we've always said there has to be a person who is managing the SeeClickFix process. Like that's a great way for people to report an issue. But if there's not someone looking at the responses, who's looking at how the system is managed, to look at how the response rates are, then we've lost out on it. You've lost that personal connection to your government and you're just being automated. There's no one for people to talk to. There always needs to be people involved in government because we are serving people.
Thanks, Chris. And before we move on to the next question from Calvin, would you like to spend just a moment sharing a little bit about your work in Macon-Bibb County? And then we'll return to the regularly scheduled questions from the panel.
Yes, my name's Chris Floor. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for Macon-Bibb. We're the fourth largest city in the state of Georgia. We're about an hour. We're south of Atlanta. We're either an hour south of Atlanta or we're 2.5 hours south of Atlanta, depending on where you're going in that metropolis. We run all of the communications ops efforts for the consolidated government, from media coverage to newsletters to event planning, social media, crisis comms, executive communications, and the fun other duties as assigned. Technology is an interesting component for us because it's become easier and easier in communications to try and communicate. You can start a Facebook page, you can start an Instagram page, but are you actually reaching the people that need to hear you? That's the big challenge we have in government communications. Is all the tools are there to do it, but if you're not reaching the communities that need to hear it, then why are you even bothering? So you've got to look at communication as a form of conversation. You have to see it as the tool that you use in communications is the room you're sitting in. And if your tool is not allowing you to reach the people, then that means you're in an empty room talking to nobody. So it's always a discussion we have is, are we reaching the audience that needs to hear us?
Well, great. Well, that's a great segue into my question. Productive and culture responsive communication with the public is central to NASPA's core competencies. From your work, what lessons have you learned about constructive public engagement and specifically communication? And we can go. Why don't we go, Kimberly, Carmen, Agbon, and then we'll go with Chris.
Sure. So I think, Chris touched on it a little bit. Like if you're sharing information, but you're not getting them, you're not where the people that need to get the information are, then, you're really not communicating effectively. So really understanding that, understanding how people get information, how you can, meet them where they are. I would say specifically like for us around, if we're talking about like cultural engagement and making sure our community is engaged, I mentioned for us, we host 4 cultural festivals. We really focused in on, we have committees that work on these. We thought we leaned into like really making an intentional invite to communities that maybe didn't feel invited or welcome downtown in the past intentionally. But, you could say something's for everyone, but until someone feels like it's for them. So using committees, using our community to really, to build those experiences and hearing back through the committees and through how we've communicated that people like for the first time felt like this was a place for them. Like that's the kind of feedback loop that we really tried to build that applies to, across the board about just, finding out where to meet them, sharing the information the way that they need it. And just honestly, just showing up and being present and being willing, like we said, to share information, to communicate, to listen. And that's really been impactful in our work in terms of building those successes on communications.
I agree with everything that Kimberly says, intentionality and definitely creating spaces for residents to feel welcome is key. I think the only thing that I would want to add to that is it's really important to remember why we're doing the work that we're doing, right? Sometimes we get so caught up in the work and getting busy that it becomes very transactional. And so we constantly have to remind ourselves, why are we doing the work that we're doing, right? Because every engagement, every opportunity we engage a person will either have a positive experience or a negative experience. And we often forget that. And so to me, it's really intentional and consistency. As I've managed PB now for 4 cycles, I've seen residents that were very hesitant to engage with us in cycle 1 and are now engaged with us, 4 cycles later, and I'm seeing them come with their kids and their neighbors and their friends. And so those consistency is so important in the work that we do, because trust doesn't happen over time, right? It doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time. And so yeah, that's all I wanted to add to this.
I guess I'm next. Yeah. So I think just a few things. Obviously, what the panelists have said so far, I think they're very relatable, in any sort of government, municipality. I think one thing that I learned over the years to really try to keep in mind of when, it came to just constructively engaging the public is that I had to understand the difference between work that I was doing or, that I was part of that the constituents need versus work that I was doing that the city wanted the constituents to engage with. I think those 2 kinds of work will require very different types of engagement strategies with the public. So something like, we put the business license system online, and so that's something that the public needs. The constituents, business owners, they need to use the system. So we have to understand how to better engage them and understand their frustrations with the system, because we want to foster economic growth within the city, versus something that we wanted them to engage with, like the Office of Violence Prevention, which, we wanted to tackle, the crime and the violence that was occurring in the city. And we knew that we needed to go out there in the streets, have people that are familiar, because it's a lot easier to get buy-in when someone from the neighborhood comes to talk to you, and then also have, good, well-researched strategies and, about engaging, the community that maybe members that were just recently witnessed or were part of, some violence that had occurred. So, when we were doing our work, we really try to keep in mind, what the end goal is, what the um, people, what the population we're trying to serve, how their interaction is intended with the city, and how best, to approach that.
I think I like the idea of talking about the intentionality of it all. I try to approach when we're trying to engage with residents or even general parts of the community that don't have the same experiences. I like to walk in and saying I don't know everything, and I'm never going to pretend like I know everything. I'm going to look to the people around me. And I think it's some good examples that tying in with technology. We have a growing Hispanic population in Macon-Bibb County, and so how are we reaching Hispanic audiences? Well, thankfully, we have two Hispanic media outlets. They both run newspapers, online platforms, and one runs a video channel. I give them whatever they want. If they can't make it to a press event, but they can come the next day, I will reset everything else up for them essentially, so that I can reach an audience that I can't communicate with. So recognizing that I can't speak Spanish, then I need to make sure that the media outlets they turn to have what they need so I get the information to them. Well, the next step of that is I just said I can't speak Spanish. Well, I hired a girl 5 years ago. She is Hispanic. I'm thinking that's not why I hired her, but added bonus could be a translator. She early on, this goes back to where I don't know what I don't know, said she can't do that. I hadn't thought through my cultural background the different types of Hispanic languages out there, the dialects, the intonations, everything that goes into it, that we can't just do one translation. I can't dial it in and say, I'm now reaching out to the Hispanic community because there's someone on my team who speaks Spanish. That's not the same thing. But I do have a better connection, someone who understands it better, can help me navigate those waters. I even go back to my wife is Ukrainian. And so when her parents come to visit me, there is a language barrier. Her mother makes so much fun of me because I use Google Translate. Google Translate does not work as well as actually speaking the language of the person who's you're trying to talk to. She laughs at me all the time. It works just well enough for her to understand what I'm talking about. So when we think technology, every web company is going to sell you a website that says we have 60 languages doing automatic translation for your website. Guess what? They're just as good as Google Translate. You're not going to hit every dialect. You can't just dial it in and say this is going to be it and expect that that's going to reach people. You always have to, going back to, you have to have the human engagement, say, no, you have these dialects. You're actually this Hispanic country here. This is the language that you have to be doing. So being intentional and recognizing that you can't just pick technology like a Google Translate to say, this is how we're going to communicate. You have to go to the people that you're trying to engage with and see how they need to be talked to, how they feel safe. For the festivals, we partnered with one of our two Hispanic outlets. There was a smaller Hispanic festival in town. They held it at this large outdoor yard sales type fair. And it was only attended by the Hispanic community. Well, that did great for them. The other outlet wanted to have one, and we held it in the middle of downtown. It had 3 times the number of participation in the Hispanic community, full day of arts and performers from different Hispanic countries to educate it on different types of food and vendors. And it was able to bring the two communities together because it was in the center part of downtown. We tried to make it open and safe for everybody and try to bring the two cultures together.
Thank you all very much. We'd like to turn to our audience now for questions. So please type your questions into the chat. While we're waiting, I'll ask a question. I think that sometimes local government actors have great intentions and yet still may do things that lead to problems with enhancing public trust. In fact, may even harm trust from the public towards the government. If you feel comfortable sharing an example of how a local government may inadvertently harm trust or do the sort of, or at least not help it through their actions, and so that we can have some lessons in that respect. Does anyone want to volunteer to go first? That's a little tricky, maybe.
No, sure. Yes or no, you're going to be wrong. That's been a favorite phrase of mine in government. Yes or no, you're wrong. It doesn't matter what decision your government is going to make. Someone is going to be mad at you because you're supposed to represent everybody, but not everybody has the same opinion about what you should be doing. So this shouldn't stop you from doing things for your community, but you also shouldn't be uh, caught off guard when you make someone angry that you have done something. We're going through it. This isn't a broken trust. It's an example of someone's going to complain. People complained about roads and potholes in our community. We are only doing 7 to 8 miles of repaving a year based on funding source. This year, we said we're going to up the game. We allocated tens of millions of dollars of funding, and we're at 130 miles of roads being repaved right now. Now people are complaining about road construction and how we're closing roads down and they have detours. That's the online conversation now, are road detours. So at some point, someone's always getting mad as you're doing things. But once you've broken trust with a neighborhood or community, it takes a while to get it back. And you have to, when you start engaging with that process, you have to recognize what broke the trust originally and how long that mistrust has been going on. We have a neighborhood here, like so many neighborhoods in the South, historically African-American neighborhoods that were split in half by the interstate road system. You can look at any economic development study and talk about the benefits of the interstates that have grown up over the last 50, 60, 70 years, but they really tore some neighborhoods apart. We have a neighborhood here that still does not trust the government, no matter how many good things we do, no matter how much work we put into it. There is a group there that still doesn't trust the parks we're building. Doesn't believe that their voices are heard even when they're at the table. It doesn't help that in that neighborhood, there are 4 different quasi neighborhood associations. So if you work with one, the other group doesn't trust you. So going back to intentionality, you have to build years of good work to overcome something. I mean, and in this case, we're rebuilding trust with a neighborhood based around a project, the interstate, that the local government didn't do. That was a state and federal project, but it's affected us locally. So we have to be advocates for the neighborhood. We have to continually go back to them, no matter how much they beat us up, no matter how much they hold press conferences about us, no matter how much they slam us, we still have to keep going back to them in order to rebuild that trust, because the work that we're doing in the neighborhood is more important in the long run than our personal feelings about someone not liking us.
Great. That's a great example. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that question?
Sure. Yeah, I think maybe like a good example is a couple years back, there was the lead crisis in Flint, Michigan, and as a result of that, some of the other older cities in America that possibly still had lead service lines, were being talked about, and there was a growing sense in Newark. Newark is a very old city, that this was also an issue in Newark, which is also, past the riots in cities that historically Black city. So I guess maybe there was a lack of communication from the government about that. And therefore, a lot of people were growing very distrustful. They were, online. There was a ton of just people commenting at or trying to get at, the city officials about are our lead service lines safe? What are you guys doing about it? What's going on? And just maybe the lack of response initially really broke down a lot of trust and made people, start going and emptying out shelves and bottled water and all these sorts of things. But fortunately, we did respond very well to it. We put a plan together. We were able to secure some state funding and some additional outside funding. We're able to let people understand that these are the areas that are affected. If you don't have to worry, you don't have to worry. We covered all the lead service line replacements, but just the initial sort of like fear that spread from people's just base understanding of, okay, so this other area was greatly affected and they're having this crisis. And, reports are saying that we might also have a problem. Like, what are our elected officials doing about this? Responding quicker would definitely have lessened some of the trust that was broken at the time. But, as Chris brilliantly says, yes or no, someone is going to have a complaint. There were obviously complaints as we were going about fixing all the service lines. We had to go place by place. We couldn't do all of them at once. There were complaints about that. There were complaints about trusting the water that we were delivering, to people in the meantime. But I think as we did the whole project successfully, people eventually understood a lot better, like, hey, the city addressed it, and the failures of maybe in some other places also help people understand, like, that the city was making like a good concerted effort to address it.
I'm going to pivot to some of the additional questions that we've had coming in. This is a difficult and thought-provoking question. When will we know when we have the public's trust? That's a complicated one to address, but if anyone has insight from their work or indicators that you monitor in your community, that would be great to hear your reaction.
Um, you know, this is a very hard question. I don't know if I have the best to answer it, but from my perspective, I think city council meetings, open council meetings, are oftentimes can be sort of a good indicator. They will always, if anyone ever watched the show Parks and Rec, their council meeting episode of that is very accurate. And all you can really hope for is that you kind of lessen the tension in those meetings, because that is usually going to be a good reflection of the public's trust. There are some people that are dedicated to going to those and causing a stir, but when things are going well, even they will know, hey, the city is addressing these things, or the government is addressing these things. I have to, I can't be so unreasonable. So that like those sort of public forums are places that can kind of indicate that. Like, you can try to survey the citizenry, but like that may not always, that may not necessarily work, but it can, depending on how you go about it. Phone survey can be like maybe an effective way to do that. And then also, if you have like block associations, you can kind of gauge. You can reach out to them and gauge um, the temperature from the meetings that they have within those institutions.
I think you should always take a view that even if you think you've gained the public's trust, that's not a time to sit on your laurels and feel like you've made it. You should always recognize that while the trust does take years to build up, a single incident could tear it down. So you've always got to work to maintain and make that trust stronger. But then you've also it's really hard to say. I mean, we could put a survey in the field and gauge the public trust, but overnight 3 murders in your downtown could decimate that. And that's so outside the government control, but it could still destroy the trust in governments. You've always got to keep maintaining, you've got to keep communicating the things you're doing. Also recognizing if you're going on different data, not just a survey, but the feedback you get. Sometimes people coming to you and complaining or asking you to fix things is not them showing a lack of trust. You could view that as they trust you to fix that problem. So if you have a downtown association, a downtown organization that's always coming to you with their problems, there's a level of trust there that you can fix it. But I hesitate to say that we're ever going to get to a spot where I want to say, yes, we've made it. Yes, we have rebuilt trust, just because you don't want that to build complacency in your system.
Carmen or Kimberly, would you like to jump in on this question?
Yes, no, I completely agree with Chris. Communities are always changing, right? People are coming in, people are living, there's always changes in the communities. So I don't think we'll ever be at a place that we can say, the community completely trusts us. I think that's an endless work that you can consistently doing, because, one very thing can break trust, but it takes a lot of work to rebuild trust, right? And so communities are large. And so I don't think, a certain amount of people or a group can speak for the entire community. So I would just say that that's an endless work for us to continue to work in the community, to continue to build trust, because there's always other people that we haven't reached.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is just finding those opportunities to make like even small steps towards delivering on requests or ways that, things that are your communities like saying that they need, even if, sometimes I think we get, especially like in economic development, can get bogged down on things that are like so big picture that takes the big developments and big projects that take a long time. But then you can think about there are probably like small steps that you can deliver to show that you're listening and in touch with your community, and that helps build trust as well. So really leaning into those opportunities to say, I hear you. This is how I'm responding now. I don't, yeah, like I said, like acknowledging, like I don't know everything right now, but we can respond to something in the meantime to help build that trust back.
Thanks to our panelists for their many insights. And Agban, thank you for the Parks and Recreation reference. It wouldn't be a local government management education webinar without a Parks and Recreation reference. And to close out our time together, to be respectful of our audience and our panelists' time, I wonder if we can conclude by offering one more observation to our audience, acknowledging that we're a community of educators in the field of public administration and policy. If there's one thing that you would want instructors to go back into the classroom to communicate to students in the fall, what would that be? If there's a takeaway message that you'd like to deliver that you want every MPA and MPP student to hear as they enter the class this fall semester and think about engaging the public, what's the one thing you really want students to know about this important work? And we can go in whatever order folks would like to take this on.
I'll start. I think one thing that I always want people to remember and that I always tell people is like, you are the government, like, I don't know how better to explain this is people oftentimes see the government as a separate function from themselves as a constituent, but your participation in society makes you also kind of part of the government and the government decision making. So it's always important to remember that as you think about how the work that they do, the work that the government does with respect to your, its impact on you, so like your civic participation is absolutely vital to making sure that the government functions how you want it to function, because you are an integral part of it, whether you want to or not.
I'll add that internships matter so much. I'm trying to get internships, learn from those that are actually doing the work, that are actually in the community. And if internships are not always a possibility, I would say volunteer. Go look at the different boards and commissions within your local government. See what Parks and Recreations. They're always looking for volunteers in the community. So definitely, I would say just being in the community is the way you really learn to really do the work. And so that would be sort of my two big items: volunteer or try to find a local internship within your local government or your nonprofit or community.
Yeah, I take on what Carmen said, and also like any like way that you can expand your knowledge, multidisciplinary study, like reading articles about different areas of study. I mean, public administration brings like so many different things together: economic development, environmental, public health, transportation planning. Like there's just so much that goes into, how we kind of administer, particularly our cities. So any ways you can like just take in as much information as possible and get to know your community. Definitely recommend that.
Policy is good, action is better. I mean, we're talking about getting your master's. That'll tell you how to write a bang up policy. But if internally that policy is not translated into the departments, is not given to the people who know how to do it, there will be no action. That policy will mean nothing but the price of the paper it's written on. So if you're going into public administration, yes, write a good policy and tomb it in gold lettering and make it official, the law of land. But that policy, you've got to take to the departments that touch the policy, sit down, come up with a plan of action, make sure the people who are doing the work understands it, because policy people won't trust you if you get your politicians to say this is the new policy, this is what it's going to do, but administratively you don't put the processes in places to actually do it, you've lost trust. So policy is good, action is better.
I want to thank our panelists for their time, for these great insights. I also want to acknowledge and thank the co-hosts for this webinar, Kelvin Johnson and Kim Nelson, for contributing to this great conversation. Thank you to Alex and NASPA for facilitating our time together today, and to the audience who will listen to this as a recording later on down the road. We thank you for your time and engagement. Also, we hope that you will take time to engage with NASPA and the Local Government Management Education Committee as we continue to think about bringing students more great insights in how to manage at the local level. We think this is vital work. Kim and I continue as co-chairs for the committee this year, so please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have feedback or comments on how the Local Government Management Education Committee can continue to support the really important work of public service education at the local level. So until we see each other again in the future, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for spending some of your afternoon with us today to talk about the important work of public service.